and welcome to QuiltMoxie, the podcast, where QuiltMoxie meets Craftsy.com, an online community dedicated to providing the best education and resources for crafters. Join me, Ariana, your host, and come along on my video journey where I participate in the Craftsy online classes and community. Meet up with us online at QuiltMoxie.com or at your favorite hangout, Craftsy, Ravelry, Facebook, Twitter. Check the credits at the end of the show for more. You can also subscribe to our mailing list to get your next and every episode with show notes delivered directly to your email as soon as the episode is available. It's as simple as dropping your email address and checking Receive Podcast by email. Welcome! Episode 10, and we're celebrating the holidays. I'm your host, Ariana, and today we've got a very special holiday episode for you. We're going to start in the gallery, then we're going to do a free Craftsy class. Yes, it is free, and we're going to create some knitting bags with Bag Making Basics by Kristen Links, and then our special guest, Tina from Knitting Blooms, is going to chat with us. So stay tuned and let's get started. So let's get started in the gallery. In the gallery, you can see that I've got our little fireplace all set up. I have my beverage ready to go. And, wait for it, a bowl of snow. So I thought for some of our audience who don't get the pleasure of playing in the snow, I'd just go out on the gallery. I didn't have to go very far. There's lots of snow out there. And my son got a couple of pine cones and some pine tree branches and a bowl of snow. So let's get into the snow. Oh, it's sticky snow. And here in Canada, we have lots of different adjectives for snow. So for example, this one is sticky. You can turn this into, oops, there it goes. You can turn it into a snowball or a snowman. No problem. So here we are, snow, and it's cold. Cold, cold, cold. So I thought it's starting to melt. I guess it must be because of our little fireplace. Who knows? But this is what snow is like, and it's very, very cold. And so here, this is what it looks like. It's just water. Woo! There you go. One bowl of snow. So let's continue with our celebrations, and I'd like to recommend that you sign up for the free Craftsy class by Kristen Links. It is called Bag Making Basics, and what she does in that class is she walks you through 2 bags that you can make. And what I really like about that, for example, the first one that I'm going to show you is a very simple bag here. And what's nice about her pattern is that you just need 2 fat quarters to do it. So what is a fat quarter? A fat quarter is when you go to your quilt shop and you buy 2 little packages of fabrics. And they call it a fat quarter because it's basically 1/4 of a yard. So what you do is you take a yard of fabric and you chop it into 4 pieces. So you get something this big, roughly. And because quilters like lots of little pieces, it's very practical for quilters to have many different fabrics. So for the Bag Making Basics, you just need 2 fat quarters. So grab a couple of your knitting friends, somebody who's got a sewing machine, somebody who knows how to sew, and bring your 2 fat quarters and make yourself some knitting bags. So I'm going to show you my holiday knitting bags that I just whipped up. Of course, I'm a quilter, so I have lots of fabrics. I don't just have 2 fat quarters, I have lots and lots. So I didn't limit myself in any way. But what I did do was I tried to stay as true to the pattern that Kristen offered. course, I couldn't help myself. I had to add little extras. So here's one of them. I've got my Christmas dogs bag. And on the inside, you can see that it's fully lined. Sort of gives you a snowflake look. And I couldn't help myself. I put a little tab on the side to hold stitch markers and whatever. And it's just a drawstring bag. Now, Kristen in the class does give you several options that you can do. So she suggests that if you want to, you can box the corners, which I did, which is not a big deal for me, but you don't have to. And the original pattern is without boxed corners. Here, I'll just show that to you again. There you go. So you see there are no boxed corners here. And it's a lot of fun. So if you have your knitting buddies over, why not have a little sew-in? The other one that I created, again, same pattern, but this time just a different motif, still boxed corners. This time I decided I was going to put a divider in the middle. So here I'm going to show you my Christmas divider fabric. On the inside, you'll see here's a divider fabric. There we go. So the inside of the bag basically has two compartments. So it's a very versatile pattern that Kristen has offered. The second pattern that she's offered is the bucket bag. And the bucket bag comes with a round bottom. Now, I was thinking about this as I was putting it together, and I thought, when you get to circles, even quilters are a little bit scared of doing curves. You could also do the bucket bag with a square bottom, which is what I did. So just to show you what it looks like with a square bottom, again, I've got my Christmas fabric out, and you can see, oh, there's more Christmas fabric on the back, on the bottom. You can design this to your heart's content. Make it as custom as you want. Here we can put in your instructions, and it fits. So for example, if I folded 8.5 by 11.5 or any pattern, it would fit on the side of this pocket. Let me just get that into the side pocket for you. So if you wanted to carry your patterns, instructions with you, and all of the little knickknacks and tools that you might want to use. And here's the inside. It's also fully lined. So those are two projects that I think would be sort of fun to start your sewing or quilting hobby with. And at the same time, you get yourself some wonderful, in my case, holiday knitting bags. Tina of Knitting Blooms podcast invited me to chat with her on her podcast a couple of weeks ago. And today, she has agreed to do the same on our podcast. So I'm so thrilled to have her here today so that you can get to meet her. Welcome, everybody. And you might have noticed that in the gallery today, I brought my fireplace because we're going to be sitting down and chatting with one of my favorite podcasters. I know you've heard me talk about her before, and she's even interviewed me on her wonderful podcast. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Tina, who is the host of Knitting Blooms podcast. So I'd like to welcome you to our little fireside chat, Tina, and I'm hoping that we can find out a little bit more about you.
Thank you, Ariana, for inviting me to join your podcast today. I am very excited about chatting with you, and I really like your fireplace.
Thank you.
So, let's hear a little bit more about how you got started knitting.
Well, that is quite a story. I actually learned how to knit when I was younger, like in my teens or so. My grandmother taught me how to knit, but I never really was that interested in knitting at that time. I did a couple of squares and that sort of thing, but never had a finished object or anything like that, and just never did anything with it at that point. I did all kinds of different crafting when I was younger. But again, knitting just wasn't something that was interesting to me. And then I was actually at a scrapbooking retreat. Before I started knitting, I did a lot of stamping and scrapbooking. And I was at a scrapbooking retreat with a friend of mine, and some other ladies at the retreat were knitting. And she says to me, she says, "Oh, I've always wanted to learn how to knit." And we had been friends for probably a few years, and she had never brought this up before. And I'm like, "Well, I can help you learn how to knit. I know how to knit. I just haven't done it in forever." I did pick up knitting a little bit in my 20s, but very briefly. But then again, when we were at the scrapbooking retreat, she wanted to learn how to knit. And the other ladies, they went out to the craft store during the retreat and got her a skein of yarn and some needles and brought it back. And we taught her how to cast on and do her first knit stitch at the retreat. And that next week, it kind of rejuvenated me to get interested in knitting, because I think one of the things was, before, I didn't have any knitting friends. And so it was not fun for me to knit. All of my friends, when I started to knit again in my 20s, were like, they wanted to party and have a good time. And that just never was my scene. So it rejuvenated me to have a friend in knitting, and we could share this together and do it together. So I came home after the weekend and went straight to Michael's and bought some yarn and some needles, and came home and proceeded to knit a bulky sweater within a week.
Ooh.
And I was just so excited about it, and so excited that she was going to start knitting with me. And so I bought more stuff at the yarn at Michael's and whatnot. And at that time, I didn't know about yarn stores. I didn't know about the local yarn stores. And it was like the following Christmas after this happened. This was in February. And at Christmas time, I told my husband, I said, I really want something to store my needles in. And so he is a very resourceful guy. And he went out in search for something to put my needles in. I had an idea, because my grandmother stored her needles in a case. And I said, this is what I want to store my needles in. And at that time, I was using only straight needles, and I just wanted something easy to store them in. Well, he was not able to find me anything to store my needles in, but he discovered 2 local yarn stores that I didn't even know existed.
Wow.
And instead of buying me something for my needles, he bought me a couple of gift certificates. So the week after Christmas, I was at the yarn store, and I was just amazed at the yarn. And I proceeded to just go overboard with my purchases. And once I found that local yarn store, that's what really did me in for knitting, because now that I knew that there was this fabulous yarn out there to work with, I was totally hooked. I think what was before that was, I was only using the yarn from the big box stores, the acrylics and stuff like that. And it just didn't really inspire me. And then once I learned about the yarn stores, that's what really inspired me to want to continue.
Wow. Did you end up joining knitting clubs, or how did you, continue? Because I see behind you this huge, amazing collection of yarn, and I know you're really busy with all sorts of activities. How did you get more knitters into your life?
Well, I started knitting in 2006, the early part of 2006. So really it wasn't until the beginning of 2007 that I started to go gung-ho. This was after Christmas and after the yarn store incident. And Ravelry was just around the corner at that time. Ravelry started in May of 2007, but actually, I believe I found some friends. I think I was introduced to a group of friends at the yarn store who met like once a week at the Caribou Coffee, and so I started going to that group, and then I learned about Ravelry a couple months later, and it just kind of snowballed from there. But once I started having that one knitting friend, it was like you just keep getting more as you continue to knit with friends.
So it's like a team sport. Right?
Yes, it is.
Because when I watch your podcast, I know you're very sporty, and I think we're going to bring it into this little chat because we're at that time of the year where everybody's thinking about their goals for 2014. So I know that we're going to talk about your sportiness at some point. So you've got your team of knitters.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you end up with a podcast?
Well, that's another funny story. Kagi TM of the High Fiber Diet has been coming to my knitting retreat. I actually started a knitting retreat before I had a podcast, and I can't even remember how she found out about it. The first retreat was on the west side of Michigan, where she's from, and her co-host at the time ended up coming to that retreat. And that's how she learned about my retreat. And then the second year, she came to my retreat, and she does an audio podcast, and she does a recording at the retreat while she's there. And the first year, I wasn't really interested in participating in it, and so I just kind of let them go ahead and do their thing. And then the next year, she really encouraged me to come down and join in and everything. So the next year, I joined in. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And then the following year, I think it was the following year, I joined in again. And it was just like, wow, this is not that difficult. I could do this. I could do a video podcast. And so I came home from the retreat and just kind of started thinking about it, just giving it some thought. And I think it was a week or two later that I started the podcast. It's like when I decide to do something, I jump in with both feet and just go.
So, but you must have had some reason, like you wanted to, how did you want to go, what did your podcast what did you want it to be?
Well, I guess I wanted to share my my projects and whatnot, but I think from the very beginning, I wanted to teach, to do lots of tutorials. In the beginning, I didn't do a lot of tutorials because I was just trying to get my feet wet and really get comfortable with it. But I think I had the idea that I was going to do tutorials from the beginning, but it just really hasn't been until this last year that I've really made a go at doing the tutorials and keeping up and continuing to do them on a regular basis.
Well, I know that your tutorials are, they're amazing because every time I watch them, first of all, when I'm sitting there watching them, I know that you're going to cover everything. I can rely on you to give the best information, and they're so clear. I know that the tutorials that you do are some of my favorites that I see. Like, I go to yours before I go to YouTube. So,
well, thank you.
Yes, for sure. I don't even remember how I found you on the internet or how I got to enjoy your podcast, but I'm sure it was similar to what you went through, where you're sort of word of mouth and everybody's sort of helping you along.
Yeah.
Yes, I hope there's going to be lots more tutorials coming.
Oh, I have a long list.
So really what I'm hearing is that you're sort of a teacher at heart,
mm-hmm.
and that's what made you want to do a podcast to share your knowledge.
Yes.
So now I also noticed that in your Ravelry group, you have sort of knit-alongs where you've got some of your patterns.
Yes.
And I like the name of your last batch of patterns, Transitioning to Winter. So
yes.
I'm looking at your gorgeous shawl. So when I was watching your first podcast, I always saw you with shawls, so I knew that you knew how to do shawls. I haven't done one yet, but it's coming. So how do you get from, okay, I want to teach, I'm going to do a podcast, and now you've got patterns. Like, how does that happen?
Well, again, it's something that I've always wanted to do. I see all these people designing these fantastic patterns, and it wasn't until I took a Craftsy course that helped me learn how to design shawl patterns, because I have tried for a long, long time to design patterns, and I just didn't get the concept of doing a shawl. I had knit lots of shawls before I designed my first shawl pattern, but for some reason, I just couldn't understand the concept of taking the pattern that I wanted to do and put it on the chart and make it work, because I like most of my things to be asymmetrical.
Okay.
Or symmetrical, I guess. Symmetrical. I like them to be equal on both sides.
Right.
And a lot of the patterns, I mean, some people think, oh, you just take a stitch pattern out of a stitch dictionary and plop it on a chart and then it's done. It's not that easy. Sometimes you have to adjust a little bit and make some changes to the chart itself and to make it do what you want it to do. And that's what I was like losing track of whenever I tried to design before I took this Craftsy course. Once I took the Craftsy course, it was like a light bulb went on and it was like, oh my gosh, I can do this now. I understand the concept. But it's still not easy to do. It still takes hours of time to work out the pattern and make it exactly what you want.
You know,
But-
I find it, sorry.
Go ahead.
I find it very surprising that there's so many free patterns on Ravelry, because I know it takes so much work to create a pattern. And even the ones that are out there, I mean, they're just a couple of dollars for the amount of work that you put into creating a pattern. Don't you find that sometimes free is a little bit too, you know?
Well, I guess it depends, because I also have some free patterns out there. I have an Afghan that I did, and the free patterns are ones that were really easy to just kind of throw together.
Okay.
They're just in one easy to download document. And actually, my Afghan pattern is called the Bubble Afghan, and I made it for my boss. I knit at work, and one Christmas, he was talking about how his dog always steals his blanket on his couch and he has to share his blanket. And so I said, well, you know what? I'll make you an Afghan of your own. And so that year I just said, what do you want? And he kind of was like, I don't know. And so I just said, okay, I'm just going to make something. And I just pulled a stitch pattern that I liked and said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I kind of altered it a little bit so it would work to how I wanted it. But it was really pretty much pulling the stitch pattern from the stitch dictionary and then just figuring out how many stitches I wanted to cast on and how big I wanted to go and whatnot, and just throwing it on a PDF. And, that to me is a free pattern. I also have some other free patterns that were just really simple, not a whole lot of thought went into them. I mean, there was thought, but it was something that most people could figure out on their own, and it was probably something that they wouldn't necessarily pay money for. And then the ones that I charge for are ones that I've spent hours and hours, designing and, plotting on a graph and whatnot.
So what would you say to somebody who would be interested in, let's say, creating some patterns of their own? And getting them, because I noticed you have a little Ravelry store. Like, is that a big learning curve to putting all that together?
It was.
Okay.
But Ravelry is so helpful with how things go. When I first set up my store, I did have to contact Casey and, get some information, and they had to help me do a couple of things. I think it's a little easier now. I think when I set up my store, they were still new at the whole designer stores and whatnot. So it wasn't as easy to set up. Like, I think now somebody who wants to set up a Ravelry store, it's so much easier. But yeah, there was a lot of learning curve as far as getting that set up and setting up my standard pattern in a software that I could just, once I got my pattern laid out and figured out, I could put it in to a pre-laid out design and whatnot. Yeah, I think everybody should try and do some designing at some point. at
Oh,
least if not for nothing else, to know exactly how much work goes into patterns, and that if somebody's charging $5 for a pattern or $6 for a pattern, it's really worth the money spent for that.
okay. And now I know that my audience is yelling at me and they're saying, what do you mean she's knitting at work? Now, did she get the job after she started knitting? Or like, how do you get a job where you're knitting at work? Is she knitting as a job? Tina?
Actually, I work as a bookkeeper at a construction company that does insurance repair. And I actually got the job through a knitter friend of mine who was the niece-in-law of one of the guys that worked at the company. She learned from her uncle-in-law that there was an opening for a bookkeeper. She knew that I was a bookkeeper, and she kind of said, I'll give them your name, and if they want to contact you, they can. Well, when she did that back in September, this was a few years back, but and I never heard from them. I thought, okay, well, maybe they changed their mind, maybe they didn't need anybody. But then they finally contacted me in the early part of, I think it was 2008. So I went to the interview, and during the interview, because he already knew that I was a knitter, he said that there are going to be times that we are going to be slow because we work as a restoration company for for repairs for homes. And if there's no big storms that come through and nobody's having floods in their basement, there's not a lot of stuff to do. And actually, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's almost dead, because who wants their house torn up during the holidays? Mm. So even if somebody has a problem that they file an insurance claim, nobody wants to have workers traipsing through their house and dealing with all that, because we all know that we're so busy anyway. To have that on top of it, they're just like, we'll wait until after the first of the year to start construction. So really, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we are really, really slow. So he told me, he said, there are going to be times we're going to be slow, bring a book to read, whatever. And I said, well, could I bring my knitting? And he's like, sure, as long as the work is done, you can knit, do whatever you want to do after the work is done. That's all I ask, is that the work get done first. And then once the work is done, you can do whatever you want. And at the office, there's 3 other guys in the office with me. But usually they're all in the office in the morning. And then by usually 10 o'clock, I hope they get out of the office by 10 o'clock, they leave the office, and then it's just me in the office, because he wants a physical person in the office to answer the phones and whatnot during business hours. And that's what I do in addition to my bookkeeping work. So when the phone's not ringing or when I don't have work to do, I can do whatever I want. So I bring my knitting with me, and I can knit or read a book or watch podcasts.
wow. Watching podcasts at work.
Yep.
That is too cool. Too cool. I guess everybody's going to want to go into bookkeeping and call up your boss and find out where there are other companies like that so that they can get a job where they're knitting.
Yeah.
So what are you doing over the holidays? Are you going to be making any New Year's resolutions, or?
I have never made New Year's resolutions. Okay. Because I find that I make a resolution and then I completely break them. The only thing that I've ever stuck to for a New Year's resolution is to get back in shape. That's the only thing that, if I've let my body go, that's the only thing that has really stuck. A lot of times I'll make resolutions for knitting. A lot of people say, I want to knit 6 sweaters and 12 pairs of socks. And I don't do that, because honestly, I just knit whatever inspires me at that time. And if it doesn't inspire me, I'm not going to want to knit it. That's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily participate in a lot of knit-alongs, or I don't necessarily knit the in pattern, when it's the in thing, because it may not be inspiring me right now. I knit what inspires me, and then that's really all there is to it. So it's pointless for me to make resolutions to say I'm going to do so many different things when I could decide one thing, and then 2 days later, my list is completely different. And I am like that a lot, with a lot of things. I can't make up my mind and I just go back and forth.
But I noticed your Ravelry group is you've got a lot of knit-alongs that you're hosting, and there's a lot of action. Like, people really get into it. Like, you like to have a big knitting team around you, and so there's a lot happening. In fact, there's one I couldn't quite figure out what the C stood for. There was Cal, Sal.
Right. The C is crochet.
Oh my goodness.
The knit along, crochet along, spin along.
Okay, so you had the knit along, crochet along, spin along, and then you had the shawl knit along?
Yeah.
And didn't you have your socks as well?
I didn't do the socks.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But you've got lots.
I've had sock knit alongs before. But yeah, I do like to host knit alongs and whatnot, because for a couple of reasons. A couple of the knit-alongs that I've done before have been for mittens, colorwork mittens. A friend of mine designs colorwork mittens. So it was a way to get her name out there and promote her patterns. And then the current North Cabin Fiber Crafts, Lori, is also a friend of mine. So again, it's a way to get her business out there, so that everybody had to buy yarn or fiber from her to work on during the knit-along. So that's one reason why I like to do knit-alongs. And then recently I did the Transitioning to Winter Shawl, which was a mystery knit-along. And everybody seemed to love that. I've done a lot of mystery knit-alongs before, and it is very exciting to let the pattern emerge, on its own and not really know what it's going to look like, and just to go with faith that the designer knows what they're doing. So that's a lot of fun to do. Well, that was my very first mystery knit-along that I designed.
Yeah. Well, I know that if I was going to ever do that, I would trust you to bring us to a conclusion, because your tutorials, like I said, I trust everything you say, because we know somehow that we can trust that we know where we're going to end up. Somewhere safe.
Yep.
With food. And I guess you're going to make us jog around the block or something, because you have that combination of sports and knitting, and I don't know, it's just a fun combination. Yeah. I like your Ravelry group, because a lot of people really, really got into it, and you could see all the pictures of their finished projects. It's amazing how you can engage so many people to do a knit-along, even though you're not doing it in other groups.
Yeah, it really is a lot of fun. I really enjoy when people participate in the knit-along, whether it's a pattern that I've designed or a pattern that somebody else has done, or just the yarn or fiber that they're using. It's just fun to see everybody's finished objects. When I get a new friend on Ravelry, I like to go and spy on their little project page and see all the different projects they do. So it's fun to have them just post them in my group. Then I don't always have to go to their project pages and see all their projects, because they're posting the pictures in the group, because I like to really see what everybody else is working on as well.
So let me ask you, Tina, now that you had your knitting laying dormant for years and years, so now you're here, you've got your podcast. What has podcasting brought to you?
Well, it really has just given me an outlet to teach knitting. A lot of people have told me that I am kind of a natural at knitting. I am kind of fearless that way. I don't let anything hold me back. If I want to try something new, I just do it. And a lot of people say, "Oh, that's so difficult. I would never, think about doing that." Or they look at a project and say, "Oh, I'm not that advanced yet." And the thing is, it's just one stitch at a time. And I try to tell people that's all it is. And it just amazes me that I can just show, in my tutorials, what I went through and how I did something. And it just turns on a light for a lot of people. And I really enjoy that I can share my knowledge with everybody and they can benefit from it.
Did you consider, starting up some workshops or?
I have thought about teaching at the LYS, but because just like how I like to change my decisions about what I'm going to knit next. And a lot of times I'm just so all over the place in doing things that I'm just afraid that I'm going to commit to something and then I'm not going to put my whole heart into it. So I prefer to do things on my own time. And that's why when I produce a tutorial, I have given it a lot of thought. I mean, some of the tutorials that I'm putting out now have been in my mind for months and months. And, people are like, oh, I need to see this or I need to see that. And it's like, sometimes I'm not at the point where I'm ready to provide information on that particular topic. So I don't do the topics until I know for sure that I am ready to give the information, because I like to think about it and just let it come to me and let it flow naturally.
Okay. Knitting, it's like you've been knitting for quite a while. Like, why has knitting stuck? Like, why are you still knitting? What do you get out of knitting?
I get lots of friendship.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I have made so many friends from knitting. And the ladies that come to my club every month, and the ladies that go to Knitopia, the ladies that participate on the group on Ravelry, it's just a lot of people that, I've got friends all over the world.
Wow.
And it just is an amazing feeling to know that I know people all over the world.
Because of knitting.
Because of knitting. Yeah,
nice. I know that you're still buying yarn. So what is it? What would make you want to buy yarn, since you can do all this now?
Well, the kettle dyeing, which is what I'm doing for my sweaters, it's kind of like a tonal yarn. It's very easy to do in the big stock pot. But some of the stuff like the variegated yarns that are what the dyers called space dyed, I could do that, but some of the colors that they come up with are just absolutely amazing.
Okay.
And sometimes when I dye, I don't measure, I don't, do anything that's repeatable. I just kind of go with the flow, and however it turns out, it comes out. Even when I'm doing space dyeing and whatnot. And a lot of times, if I go into a dye project with a specific idea in mind, like I want to come out with this yarn with these colors, it never happens. It's more, if I do it, just throw it together and see how it turns out. Somehow it comes out fabulous.
Nice.
But to try and say, okay, I want a pink and green, and I want this pink, and I want this green, and I want it to do exactly this, it never works out that way for me. So I don't try. I don't try to make it happen. I just do it for the fun of it, and whatever comes out, and usually it's something that I like.
Well, it really sounds like you're enjoying knitting with all the friends that it's brought you.
Yep.
And I know that I enjoy your podcast, and I would love everybody to go and check out your podcast, because you have everything. And I love the fact that you're always shopping and always buying new stuff. And I love watching your yarn. So I'd like to invite everybody to go over, check out Tina's podcast. You will not be disappointed. You're going to love her.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be on your podcast. I have enjoyed your podcast as well, as you know, and I have watched every episode, including the most recent one. And I enjoy your tutorials as well. You have a unique take on some of the tutorials, like the one that you did recently with the I-cord with the crochet hooks. I really liked that. I liked that just uniqueness of how you did your I-cord.
Well, thank you very much, Tina. Wow. What did we leave out? Did we leave out anything?
I don't have a list.
Well, I'm just doing that to show off, really.
Oh.
Because, I mean, it's kind of intimidating having an interview with an overachiever, right? And I don't have a list. I probably just have a blank piece of paper here.
I am definitely an overachiever, though. I've been told that quite often in my life. But it's because when I set my mind to doing something, I make it happen, no matter what it is. Everything that I've ever set my mind to doing, I'm able to accomplish because there's this drive in me that wants to make it happen.
To wrap up our holiday episode, let's go out on the back porch and watch some big, fat snowflakes. You can connect with me as QuiltMoxie at your favorite social hangout or on Ravelry where I am So QuiltMoxie. And So QuiltMoxie is SEWQUILTMOXIE. Join us on Ravelry at QuiltMoxie the podcast group and participate in our Win a Free Craftsy class contest. Tell us about your favorite Craftsy class or which Craftsy class you'd like to take if you haven't already taken one to have a favorite, and click on the Enter Contest link. Once we hit our 100 member milestone, we will draw the winner of the free Craftsy class. I'd like to thank you for watching. And from our home to yours, may the spirit of your holidays carry you throughout the new year filled with family and friends. The gift of the holidays is a precious reminder that we are loved. May you cherish the good times making memories, and as Gerda Weissman Klein reminds us, enjoy the magic of a boring evening at home. Bye for now. À la prochaine.